show. Uh, our judge today is Bryce Munn. I have to pull up his bio real quick because I didn't get my phone out early enough. So Bryce is originally from Wall, Texas. His family operated a small show pig operation, primarily crossbreds. Has degrees from Blinn College, Texas A&M, and Sam Houston State. Competed in livestock, or all sorts of judging teams and coaching judging teams. Currently lives in Brenham, Texas, with his wife and 3 kids, and is the judging team coordinator at Blinn College. He enjoyed the show last year. Is excited to be back and work with the youth of Eddy County. Ringside, we have Lane Hoffman, who will be judging showmanship tonight. He was our cattle judge this morning. So, Class 1 spots to the ring. Oh, I almost forgot. Take all the pictures you want. Don't post them until Thanksgiving. Okay? No shaking hands with the judge. Social distance. Yada, yada.
Please bring all Class 1 spots to the show ring. All Class 1 spots to the show ring. Please bring all Class 1 Durocs to the wash rack. All Class 1 Durocs to the wash rack.
County. I can tell you from personal experience that when Houston got canceled and Austin got canceled, that the look on some of those kids' faces, and even my kids that we had going to a lifestyle judging contest is demoralizing. There's not a whole lot you can do to help, and there are very few people on planet Earth that can pull together something like that sheer out of the love of young people. So my hat's off to you guys for making that happen. These three hogs that we got out here, I think are good. They're different. Each one of them probably poses something that you like, and maybe some things that you change. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you one thing. A young lady here has got a bear that I think is tremendously expressive. The problem that I've got with her and why she ends up being third, just a little bit too hard right there in that bear's forerib. He's a bit tight and short in his hip construction and doesn't work quite good enough out of his hip and his rear leg. He ends up falling out of this top three because I think the top pair of hogs are very good for different reasons. We've got the gilt there that's massive. She's wide, she's powerful, she's big hipped and massive. When you get off to the side of that gilt, she's probably pitched a little bit too far forward there in her shoulder. She's a little bit more limited in her step, not near as soft and productive in her look. But to be honest with you, when she hit the ring, I didn't think she'd last this long. She's actually more mobile than I initially gave her credit for. The young lady's bear that we have directly here behind her is a very deep-bodied one. He's a very productive bear. You get on top of him, does he have just enough pig? Is there quite enough in terms of top shape? Is there quite enough when you get in behind him? I don't think there is. Young man's going to win the class. Young lady's going to be second. I think we get in some close pairs with 4 and 5 as well. You guys can both come out. Young lady in 4 has got one that's probably a bit more elevated, a bit raw in terms of her design, and definitely has just more meat animal shape built into her framework. Probably not as attractive, definitely not as fresh. And the young lady who's got this hog in 5 absolutely does a killer job of getting one stuck, and my hat's off to you. The problem that I've got with this bear is when you get directly in behind him, he gets quite a bit plainer in terms of his hip. As Penn said, he brings his hind leg in too much. And when you compare him to maybe the group, probably more of an age thing than anything else, but he gives up a ton in terms of just power and product, and we could still probably reorganize his rear leg just a touch. Coming down next, young lady's got a gilt that's still stout-featured. She's big-chested, a hog that does have some expression. She does get a little bit drier right there on the top side of her blade, a little bit up in her tine, a bit too flat in terms of her body shape, a bit coarser in terms of her joint weight. I do think that gilt's got a lot of quality pieces to her, probably not quite as fresh enough, probably not quite as productive enough to get up in the top end of this heat, but a really good gilt that we have there coming out next. Another one, stout-featured, real burly type of gilt that just doesn't have quite as much when you get on top of this hog. A little bit flatter in terms of her full rib, a little bit plainer in terms of her muscle shape. Young man comes out next with a massively, expressively muscled type of bear that's too ill in terms of his build. We've got to push his blade further back onto his body, maybe give him just a shot more grow, fix his body shape. He's got all the muscle and power you could ever ask a hog that size to have, and needs to come with a better set of running gear for me to work him up any higher. A deeper bodied, softer centered one that definitely carries a bit more condition than I'd like to see. Also probably could be reorganized a bit structurally. Steady that one coming at you, wants to roll out just a bit. I like the depth of body. I like the look of productiveness. Needs to come with some more muscle shape for me to give him that label. My compliments, folks, again. Give those kids a big round of applause if you would as they exit the ring.
First place went to James King, Country Clovers 4-H. Second place went to Swayze Fulmar, Cottonwood 4-H. Third place went to Grayson Kirkendall, Cottonwood 4-H. Fourth place went to Alyssa Aragon, Loving 4-H. Fifth place went to Madeline Clark, Carlsbad FFA. We are so sorry we missed the last one of those, but please give all the exhibitors a round of applause. Please bring all your Class 2 Durocs to the wash rack, all your Class 2 Durocs to the wash rack.
It's a really good, whoa. That's how my kids hear me, not you guys. Check. Good class, and this top pair in particular, I think are good pigs, and the drive probably wore down another one in here, but the young lady's bear here just strikes me as one that's a bit more my kind in terms of maturity pattern. I think it starts how fresh that one is in terms of top shape and belly, been fed impeccably well. This one's a bit fresh on the top side of his crest, and when he profiles, there's not one that we've seen hit the ring so far that can kind of match his look from the profile. Is he as stout-legged? Is he as massive and powerful maybe as a few others? Probably not, but I think that's a very complete, fundamentally good kind of a hog that wins this particular drive. The powerhouse is the young lady here in second. That's a wide constructed, bold-bodied, big muscled one. As the drive wears on, that one probably wears down just a bit quicker, a bit tighter in her hip, a bit tighter in terms of his rear leg travel. You get on top of that pig, in particular his blade forward, a little bit crestier and more mature about his skull and neck. Then we get him in terms of his blade set, a bit too pitched forward, a bit out there in his elbow. A really good bear that sits second. My compliments and congratulations to both those young ladies. Young lady's gilt that we have in three, I think, has got some really cool pieces to bring to the table to this top three. Pig just has an attitude problem today. One that I think is really good from the side, one that's expressive and still kind of raw maybe in terms of belly, but I like the proportionality of that hog. It's a gilt that I still think has a tremendous amount of muscle that still handles it good enough in terms of her feet and legs. One that just has to act a little bit better, maybe stouten her up just a bit in terms of her bone work and body shape, and that one could play in that top pair. This is just a good kind of meat animal. A heavy constructed, big bodied one that's big muscled. He's built for probably a bit more on the market side of things than he is a show pig. I think a hog that probably just hits you as a nickel planer, a bit staler in terms of his look, doesn't proportion out quite as good from the side, but I like a lot of things about that hog just in terms of meat animal shape and stoutness. Young lady, if your gilt's hind leg worked any better, I'd have her in fourth for sure, because hock up and hip forward, I think that's probably a better pig in terms of depth of body, proportions, and definitely a higher quality look from the side. You get on top of that gilt, she's a bit plainer in terms of her top shape, she's a bit flatter in terms of the center part of her body, and when she goes away is where she ends up sliding down in 5. She's a frailer legged gilt that wants to throw her hind leg outside of the plane of her body. I like to keep that gilt where she sits there in 5. Young lady comes out next with a robustly huge centered one. That's a big chested hog, and young lady does an awesome job of getting him stuck. Just couldn't be further away from maybe my kind. A bit too moderate in his frame, a bit too quick in his maturity, a bit too much in terms of his condition. That's a shorter couple bear that just doesn't suit me quite well. I like the extra rib. I like the extra muscle. I just need to stretch him out, not only in his hip and his body shape, but more importantly, his growth curve as well. We round out the class with a young lady who has a gilt that probably fits that a little bit more, a bit later maturing, a bit bigger in his kind, a bit longer bodied, a bit longer growing. He doesn't have the muscle shape, he doesn't have the skeletal width and product to kind of compete with that top end. My compliments again. Really good job, folks. Again, give those kids a big round of applause as they exit the ring.
First place went to Haley King, Loving FFA. Second place went to Kendall Cone, Loving 4-H. Third place went to Cheyenne Quintanilla, Loving 4-H. Fourth place went to Chloe Vaught, Loving 4-H. Fifth place, Morgan Townsend, Cottonwood 4-H. Sixth place, Kimber Cone, Loving 4-H. And seventh went to Abby Nichols, Blue Jeans and Boots.
a good trio, I think, that sorts themselves up to the top, and maybe even four that I think you could probably argue are all in contention. And our class winner's not perfect. The young lady here in front of me is going to win the class, and I think when we really studied that one, maybe knee down and hawk down, there's probably a thing or two that we could change a bit. One that we'd like to see a bit stouter in terms of her feature and maybe set her knee back into her just a bit. But that thing from there up, I think, dominates the group in terms of width and body shape and back shape and pin shape. I think that thing just suits me the best in terms of proportions. Still motor's good enough. It's a nice pair that leads off this particular group. My compliments to that young lady. Young lady, absolutely. Give her a big round of applause. When the young lady here hit the ring, I thought that this particular class was over. This one suits me quite well in terms of her proportions. I think one that's very good in terms of his top line and underline and how that kind of blends together. That Barrow, and I think if you get on top of him, you'd probably give him okay in terms of top shape. You get in behind him, that's a Barrow that I think just starts to run out of gas in terms of skeletal width and power. That's a Barrow when you compare him to maybe the hogs on either side of him. Is a bit plainer in terms of his base. He's definitely plainer in terms of his full rib. He's definitely flatter in terms of the center part of his skeleton. I actually prefer the use and maybe angulation of his lower rear joints over the class winners. That's a close pair because he proportions so good. He ends up second because he doesn't have quite just enough. Young lady that we have in third is probably a bit stouter in terms of feature, a different bigger mug in that one. I like the extra turn this one has up high. This one's hip and hind leg simply needs to be altered for me to work that one up. A little bit short and round in his hip and wants to stab his rear leg by kind of camping it underneath him. I think the front 2/3 of that bear are absolutely in contention. The back third is where he ends up there in third. Young man that comes down next, a good job getting this one presented. I like the depth of body, the productiveness of that one center body. It's huge in terms of his hip. It's a massive, wide constructed type of pig that just doesn't balance together, doesn't get out and go quite good enough, in particular out of his rear leg, for me to move him up any higher. And I guess for me, if I'm going to get particular, I'd like to maybe clean him up through his jowl line and lower third, maybe pull that extra condition that he's working with in order for him to work up any higher. He's still quite a bit trimmer and later maturing than the young lady's bear we have coming out next. Again, we talked about one that maybe just isn't my kind. Too quick in his maturity, too compact in his makeup. Need to pick that guy up in his framework, his pasterns, give that guy a shot more muscle to maybe combat some extra condition that he's got. I think the same can be said for the young man that comes out next, one that's not quite as stable in terms of his rear leg. For how massive he is in terms of body and power and muscle, that one gets really fragile in terms of his rear leg. Gets a bit more uncoordinated and awkward in how he uses his rear leg. And for me, again, probably a bit quick in his maturity and definitely like to pull that bark that he's got on his tree as well. We round out the class with definitely a later maturing option that's probably got more on his shape, or one that I think just gets too uncoordinated, maybe too ill in terms of his build and balance. If we can combine those two hogs together, I think we've probably got one that works up towards the top three. I need to see just a shot more in terms of body and power for that bear to move up any higher. A nice group again, folks, if you would. Give those kids a big round of applause.
Please bring all your Class 1 hamps to the wash rack. All your Class 1 hamps to the wash rack. First place went to Madeline Clark, Carlsbad FFA. Second place went to Lauren Henson, Artesia FFA. Third place went to Maddie Cooksey, Loving FFA. Fourth place went to Mason Golden, Cottonwood 4-H. Fifth place went to Ariana Carrasco, Loving 4-H. Sixth place went to Miles Klein, Blue Jeans and Boots. And seventh place went to Alexander West, Sia Sharpshooters.
The pair of class winners, I think, represent those particular lineups quite well, and my compliments to not just these two young ladies, but to each of the Duroc exhibitors. I thought there was quality and there was depth built into each one of those lineups, so my hat's off to you. Just to kind of highlight maybe the things that I like about each one of them, the young lady who has the heavyweight has definitely the more powerful option in terms of scale to width, probably an advantage right there in the middle part of his body in terms of shape and turn to the middle part of his rib, in particular his forearm. And that's allowed maybe just a shot more dimension up high. He's big in his pin set. We talked about maybe his lower rear joints not being ideal. That's a bear that I do think has a ton of quality, and he proportions very, very well. The young lady who wins the first class has got one that's built for speed in terms of feet and legs. I think one that's incredibly good and how he's put together from the side as well. You get on top of that bear, he's very, very fresh in the way he's been put together. A bear that I still think has a good rib cage built into him. He probably gives up some horses in terms of power from behind. I like his rear joints. I like how he uses them. This guy is dead killer when he gets to the side. My compliments to the young lady's lightweight champion in Duroc. We bring in this young lady's second place out of that first class, and we talked about him and that drive and maybe having the same advantages that the heavyweight had compared to our champion. That's a wide constructed one who's huge centered, he's huge backed, and he's huge hip. He probably comes with just a bit more things to pick apart in terms of his feet and legs, his hip construction, his rear leg travel. I think he's a tremendously high quality pig, but the one that suits me the best. Young lady's class winner out of the last class will be your reserve.
Your champion Duroc went to Haley King out of Class 1 from Loving FFA, and your reserve champion Duroc went to Madeline Clark out of Class 2 Carlsbad FFA.
Can we get Class 2 Hampshire to the wash rack, please? Class 2 Hampshire.
When this one hit the gate, I figured it was going to be a run for second. Comparatively, I think the gilt is awfully good. The young lady here on my left is driving. That's an opened up one that's good-bodied, very fresh, good and fundamental in terms of feet and legs. In my opinion, that one wins pretty easily. My compliments to her. I look forward to seeing what she looks like compared to the rest. 2 and 3, I thought actually became a bit more competitive, and maybe actually 2, 3, and 4. I think each one of them has something that you want to latch a hold of and run with. And there's probably one thing about each one of them that everybody ringside would say, hey, you shouldn't do that because this one's this. And I agree with that. And for me, that thing on the young man's gilt is maybe just not quite enough in terms of body shape. You get on top of that gilt, she's quite a bit flatter in her full rib, a bit up and dry in her flank. You get off to the side of her, I think is where she starts to peak. I think that one's good from the side. I think she proportions the gilt that I do think probably has the shot more in terms of width to her chest. And I think she's a bit looser in how she uses her hip and her hind leg than the young lady here that we have in third, who's arguably fresher backed and probably a bit fuller in terms of her lower body comparatively. I just couldn't get past this one's hip and rear leg assembly and use. If that one could go and flex just any easier, that one would definitely be second in my opinion, because hip forward, or ham loin forward I should say, I think that's probably the second best pig. I need that one to go better. A nice compliment of those two, all three of those really good hogs that we had there in the top 3. Young man's got one that probably is just a bit more fundamental and basic in the way he's put together. A really good, opened up, flexible type of bear that's good in terms of his center. He's big back. It's a bear that's a bit of paler and maybe drier in his skin and staler in his look. He's a bit cresting the top of his neck, maybe a bit plainer in the way he's put together all the way. But if you say, hey, that one's stouter, that one's probably looser structure than third and second, I can't argue that one bit. I think that's a good bear that ends up in 4 that somebody else could grab the mic and move that one up a little bit. Young lady's got one that was a little bit of a hothead and wanted to run off, and maybe that hindered that one a little bit to really showing herself because she got tight in terms of her hip and her rear leg travel pretty quick. She's a bit more compact in general. I think one that does have muscle. She's big pin, she's big top. I need to get that one going a bit differently. I'd certainly like to elevate her at the point of her shoulder and lengthen her out in terms of her growth curve. I like the width. I like the mass the young lady's bear has got. I need to put it in a different package from the side. In particular, hip and rear leg travel become too concerning for me. A hog that I do think has some muscle has to go better in order for me to move that one up any higher. I love the expression and the raw back. This one's laid into her. Too tight and hard in terms of center body. Hip and rear leg assembly need to be altered again before we can get that one up any higher where she sits. My compliments again, really good class, folks. If you don't mind, tell those kids we appreciate all the work they put in by giving them a big round of applause.
First place went to Kaylee King, Loving FFA. Second place went to James Alexander, Loving 4-H. Third place went to Morgan Townsend, Cottonwood 4-H. Fourth place went to Trevor Pope, Country Clovers. Fifth place went to Zaylin Aragon, Loving 4-H. Sixth place went to Kiefer Klein, Blue Jeans and Boots. And seventh went to Jeremiah West, Dia Sharpshooters. Please bring all your Class 3 Hampshires to the wash rack. All Class 3 Hampshires to the wash rack.
This is a tougher class to put together because I think probably the ones that you have in terms of width and body and maybe some freshness all have at least one structural problem that you'd like to fix, and maybe the one that has the one that I'm just the most comfortable with all the extras poked into it as well, is the young man's thin-belted bear there on the far side to win this particular lineup. He is massive in terms of his back shape. He's big pinned. His hock stays within himself. I don't think I'm saying he's more comfortable by any stretch of the imagination. He's a bit rigid and tight in his hock and would certainly like to give him a shot more flex, maybe even pull his blade back onto his body a touch, but he's elevated. I love that dude's proportions from the side. I've got to get him going better in terms of his rear leg. Now, one's probably more flexible and looser in terms of rear leg travel, but still wants to maybe play out of the side, the plane of that one's body cavity, is the young lady's bear here. I think that thing is massive in terms of body shape and productiveness. She does a killer job of getting this one shown. I like this one's freshness and proportions just a bit better than the hog that we have in 3. What I like to give that thing just a shot more in terms of flexibility and maybe collectiveness is the better word to how she uses that one's hind leg. Yeah, I'd like to do that and probably pick him up just a bit in terms of his top line. He'll get a little easy every once in a while, but I like that one in terms of look, freshness, and proportions, and a little bit looser in terms of his rear leg travel than even our class winner. Young man's got a gilt that I think does probably handle her lower rear joints a bit better than, again, our class winner. One that I do think is bold and productive. And the top side of that one's skeleton, big back, big hip. One that, to me, when you get off the side of that one compared to the top pair, that becomes the plainest one of the group. A bit shorter faced, a bit throatier, one that probably doesn't give you that wow factor from the profile, but a nice top trio. My compliments to each one of them. Man, if we could get this one going just a bit better, too. It's another one that's right in the heat with all that group. I think it's massive chested, phenomenal in terms of that one's body shape. Fed impeccably well because he's fresh. He's huge in terms of his back shape. I need to clean him up in his lymph and the lower part of his body. I should like to pull that off of him and have him go and plant just square from hock, knee to ground. If we can get all those sides going just a bit more comfortable and square, that's a bear that I could have easily latched a hold of to win this particular group. I love the burliness and the stoutness that the young lady's bear comes out next. If every pig had this one's huge rear leg, you'd have one happy judge. I can tell you that much. I love that about him. That's a bear. Then you compare him to the group. He reads just a bit more mature. His crest is starting to show his age just a bit. He's a bit short in his hip, pinched there in his ham loin. That's a hog that I do think has some tremendously unique pieces. I don't know if he's quite youthful enough. I don't know if he's quite fresh enough to run with that top end. All those hogs I think are awfully good. I think they're awfully competitive. You could have sorted those a few different ways, and I wouldn't argue with you. A shot more muscle shape and look up front the young man's got. We need to get that one's joints a little bit cleaner. We need to get that one going just a bit more effectively. A little bit wider constructed bear that we round out the particular group with. We need to get that guy just a bit more attractive the way he's put together from a balance standpoint and a structural standpoint. A nice class again, my compliments. A really good group towards the top end.
First place went to Dorian Cortese, Artesia FFA. Second place went to Addison Fulmar, Artesia FFA. Third place went to Caden Golden, Artesia FFA. Fourth place went to Lupito Carrasco, Loving 4-H. Fifth place went to Maddie Cooksey, Loving FFA. Sixth place went to Chance Bones, Cottonwood 4-H. And seventh place went to Kiefer Klein, Blue Jeans and Boots.
Well, by now, folks, I think you'd probably agree with my wife that I talk too damn much and I need to shut up and just do my job. But I'm telling you, this top four, I think, is a five, really, is very close because they have some differences and some things that you'll catch a look and say, that's definitively the one that I want to use. And the next one will be, man, I'd use that one if it didn't have this one. So I don't really know what I'm going to do yet. I want to talk pigs with you real quick, and then I'll tell you how I place them if you guys are okay with that. The young man here has got a gilt that I think proportions out incredibly well. I think that one's good in terms of her underline. I think that one really balances up quite well from the side. You get on top of this gilt, and I think she does have a good shape run on the top side of her skeleton. You work a little bit further down in that gilt, you compare her to a few others that we have in the group. She's a bit tighter in her forerib, a bit flatter in the lower part of her skeleton, and that kind of holds true when you get in behind her. She wants to pull her rear leg inside herself just a bit. Maybe we could set her blade back onto her body. Is she sound? Is she great looking? Is any of that just a big deal breaker? No. The determining factor is, does she have enough? Now, the young man's Vera here has got one that has been fed, I think, really, really well, and probably has just a bit more groceries on him like myself. I think a hog that does have width. I think that's a hog that's tremendously big back. He's big enough in terms of his hip. You start to read that guy from the side. He reads a bit more mature on the top side of his neck and his crest. That's a bear that, to me, reads a nickel plainer ahead of his shoulder and definitely carries a bit more condition than I'd like to see. I like his hip and his rear leg use. I just think that bear is probably a bit too straight fronted. I also think he's a nickel planer in the way he's put together. And then we have this young lady's bear here that's incredibly fresh in terms of her skin and hair. That's a bear from his ham loin forward, dominates this class, and it's not even close in my opinion. A big-chested, good form one that's great in terms of his look up front. He's really raw still in the shape that he has to his back, a bit flatter in terms of his forerib. I'd love to blend his 10th into his ham loin and hip just a bit smoother, and if we can do that, I think it's really easy. I think that's a hog that's tremendously good for the things that he brings to the table. To me, that's the bear that has the most extras. My compliments to that young lady. She's going to win this particular class. Young man here in the blue shirt's going to be in 2. The really big bear here is going to be 3. The freak of nature is the hog that we have in 4, and you can go ahead and send that one out. This thing is an absolute tank in terms of width, in terms of muscle, and a lot of folks can grab the mic and hop in the middle of your ring in Eddy County today and fall in love with this one, use it to win this show, and I think that's fine. Some people like myself probably think that gilt's a bit too much in terms of her muscle. It's a bit too round in her hip construction. She's probably just a bit too much for me at how she comes off as a nickel, course in the way she's put together. But if you think that thing's awesome because she's wise, she's powerful, she's big-bellied, and want to run her up to the top of the class, I can't argue or dispute any of those things because she is. I have to get that gilt better in terms of her hip. I probably like to tone her down just a bit in terms of her muscle shape. Man, when this one hit the ring, I was hoping she'd have just a bit more from behind because that look, the front third of that gilt is tough to make, and it's tough to beat. The problem is we get behind that, that's a gilt that of that top 5 or 6 becomes the flattest in terms of her forerib, the plainest in terms of her muscle. When you compare her, especially in terms of freshness, she wants to work up in her chine just a bit as well. It's a tremendously good group. My compliments to each one of them. Young man comes down next with a very big backed one that needs to probably match up some of that power from behind. I like the feature. I like the look of that one, but doesn't probably have just quite as much directly in the seat of his pants comparatively. I'd also like to pick him up on his front pasterns and set his shoulder further back onto his body. A tank comes out next, an absolute tank, and this is by far and away the best pig of the day that will put this low in the class. Massive chested, massive bodied, massive back, one that just is not quite good enough in terms of his look, not quite good enough in terms of his hip and his rear leg travel, but that thing is going to hang up, and he's going to send some power, some pounds, and some profitability to whoever's holding him. My compliments to that young lady. I need that one's belly to be tucked up and have him look just a bit more like a show pig from the side. My compliments to each one of those. A tough class to put together, folks. If you would, give those kids a huge round of applause.
First place went to Swayze Fulmar of Cottonwood 4-H. Second place went to Trey Tarvin, Country Clovers. Third place went to Caden Golden, Artesia FFA. Fourth place went to James King, Country Clovers. Fifth place, Ashton Tarvin, Country Clovers. Sixth place, Chance Bones, Cottonwood 4-H. And seventh, Alyssa Aragon, Loving 4-H.
This is a tremendously good group of hamsters, folks, and if you can agree with me with that, let's give all those exhibitors a big round of applause. A tremendously good set. You know, the weights get kind of close in these first two classes, and so I just went and asked. I said, hey, young man, what's your gilt weigh? He says, 230. I said, young lady, what's your gilt weigh? Just 220. I asked this young lady, when's the last class? I said, what's your pig weight? She goes, eh. I said, is it more or less than me? She goes, ooh, I think less. She's probably right, but not a great way to butter up the judge. The hogs are awesome, folks, and again, I'll just highlight the things that I like about each one of them. The young lady who wins the first class, I think if you could probably change the snout on that thing, and I know that sounds incredibly petty, but if we could change that one's look up front, that one from his blade back or her blade back, I think is very, very good. The young man here that wins the second class has probably got one that's bigger and bolder in terms of forearm and top shape and hip. Lower rear joints on that one need to be reorganized for me. We talked about this young lady who wins the last class. The front two-thirds of that pig are absolutely my speed. The rear thirds probably not. I need to fix that one in terms of his top line right into his ham loin and maybe get that thing blending just a bit smoother into his hip. Three incredible pigs. I really don't care about the weight. I'm going to use the one that I like the most. The lightweight's my favorite. It's a nice gilt that was second in the class of our champion, and we talked about her in class. I think one that still proportions out, is loose and flexible, one probably doesn't have just the biggest feet and legs that you'll ever see, and she's probably not as robust in the middle part of her body comparatively. That's a gilt that I think certainly fits within the realm of quality. It gets a lot closer, in my opinion, with the group that we have out here. I think there's probably some personal preferences, and again, folks, when you grab the ring and you hop in the mic, use the ones you like. That's all I'm going to do tonight. Young ladies heavyweight's my second favorite.
Your champion Hampshire went to Kaylee King out of Class 1, and your reserve went to Swayze Fulmar out of Class 3.
Can we go ahead and get the Class 1 crossbreed to the wash racks, please? Class 1 crossbreed.
So depending on where you want to kind of stick your flag and put some priorities, you could switch these up. But it's top 5 or 6 up a lot because I think there's some that there's no doubt in my mind. There's some in here that have extra pieces that are stouter and that are better looking than the gilt that I end up naming champion. There's none of them that are as flexible. There's none of them that I think are as good in terms of feet and legs. This one I think is good in terms of center body. She's still big pin. She's still big back. She's not a market animal, just a massive market animal like the rest, but she has plenty of muscle. And where I'm more comfortable is using her setter running gear to win this particular group. I like a lot of things about that gilt. I wish that I could take her home and breed on her because I think she has some pieces that make her really, really good. Maybe compared to a few others, she's probably not built quite as much like a market hog. She's frailer boned. She's not as attractive ahead of her shoulder, and one that's definitively doesn't have quite the extra mass and dimension up high as the second, third, fourth, or even fifth place gelding. I like that hog's fundamentals to win this particular group. Young lady's got a bear that I think the front 2/3 of is pretty good. I think I drove him a bit hard, and I think a hog that got tighter as the drive wore on. He is too short and round in his hip, and that doesn't help his, maybe his rear leg travel. He still stays within himself, and his front structure to me is probably just a little less severe than the one that we have in third. Huge back, a good shape to the upper part of his skeleton. We'd like to soften him up in his belly. I like that one's view coming at me in terms of chest, forearm, and squareness of knee to ground compared to the hog that we have in 3. I would guarantee you that a lot of folks would gravitate towards this one because that thing is killer looking up front, huge back, and young lady, you done an awesome job of getting her presented because she's fresh, she's great in her top line, she's excellent in terms of her skin and hair. Her feet and legs just don't scream, use me, at least to this show judge. I'd like to maybe reorganize that one in terms of her hip and her rear leg. And we talked about this in a class a few earlier. Probably just a bit too much in terms of muscle for me. Too round, too coarse, doesn't fit me quite as much. But I like a lot of things about that gilt, and it's tough to find a showman that is better than that young lady right there. My compliments to her as well. Speaking of good showman, this young lady that comes out next, I think does an awesome job. And if you just watch this bear from the profile, he's one that you probably would work up just a bit more and more. He's huge-bellied. He's very proportional in his look. I think that's stout. He's still powerful. The problem is that you don't just look at him from the side. He's going to have to go away from you at some point in time, and his rear leg does not stay inside of him good enough for me to use him. I think a hog that does have plenty of shape, I think he's really good in the center part of his body. He's not as fresh in his look, his hair, his condition, maybe of the top 3 or 4, but a hog that I think for me, if his hind leg was any better, we could probably work him up to the top pair, if not try to win this particular group. Again, very fresh, presented to the tee. I like a lot of things about this particular bear. It's hard to find one that's bigger back than this one. He doesn't blend things together quite as good. If you look at him coming directly at you, he's too pitched forward in his shoulder. His knee wants to cave in just a bit too much. That coincides with his full rib. That also coincides with him from behind, a rounder hip that wants to bring his rear leg into him. I like the muscle shape, and I think that young lady does an awesome job of getting that thing fed and shown. I just wish that we could organize his skeleton a bit different, and if we can do that, that's another one that has some pieces that I think work up to the top. I like the proportions and the look of this particular bear. He gets out horsed real quick in terms of just feature and mass and power. That's a hog that I do think is good-bodied. He's fresh in his center skeleton. The bear that I think for his size and weight has plenty of muscle shape. I think a hog that just gets out horsed just a bit in terms of muscle and in terms of power, and I too think we could probably level him out in his top line, lengthen his hip out, and I think that would allow his rear leg to motor just a bit differently and better. And this one's not quite as fresh to look at, but I like some pieces of this particular gilt. Big back, big hip, and big pen. One that's a bit more compact in the way she's put together. A little bit shorter in terms of her hip, a bit shorter bodied gilt that needs to be lengthened out in her growth curve, but she motors pretty good. Just a bit plainer in the way she's put together. I'd also like to fix her at the top of her neck and how it blends into the top of her shoulder. Good-bodied, loose enough structured bear that doesn't have enough gas to get up towards the top end. You just stouten him up in terms of bone work, muscle shape to get him up and compete with the top end. Young man's got a bear that's incredibly long-bodied and big-featured. Need to fix that one in terms of feet and legs. One that, again, would like to maybe blow up in his forerib and freshen him up just a bit. A great way to round out a great class. My compliments, folks. If you go in, again, give them a big round of applause. Your Yorkshire exhibitors did a great job.
Your champion Yorkshire went to Addison Tarvin. Your reserve champion Yorkshire went to Maddie Cooksey. Third place went to Kaylee King, Loving FFA. Fourth place went to Kendall Cone, Loving 4-H. Fifth place went to Grayson Kirkendall, Cottonwood 4-H. Sixth place went to Callie Bennett, Artesia FFA. Seventh place went to Stetson Quintanilla, Loving 4-H. Eighth place went to Ethan Clark, Carlsbad FFA. And ninth went to Jonah Pope, Country Clovers.
Can we get class 2 of crossbreed to the wash rack? Class 2 of crossbreed.
Really good class, and this top pair, I think, kind of surfaced themselves up really quick, just in terms of presence and quality from the side. And this young man's gilt's not perfect in terms of her rear leg travel, but one that I'm just a bit more comfortable with. She's cleaner jointed. That's a hog that I think probably has a shot more in terms of center body dimension. She's opened up. She proportions out quite well. I'd like to probably reorganize and reassemble, I should say, that one's rear leg and how it gets out in motions and flexes. But I think you get outside of that, that's the best pig. I think this one's elevated, extended. I think a bear that young lady does an awesome job of getting stuck as well. One that I think when you get on top of this particular bear and compare him to our class winner, I think he starts to play out in terms of muscle shape back through his ham loin and to his hip. And then you start to work down in his joints, a bit coarser there in his hog that I don't think gets out and is flexible to get over, maybe get over the fact that that one gives up just a shot in terms of muscle shape and back shape as well. My compliments to both those young people. Do an awesome job of getting them presented as well as the young lady here that we have in third. This is the oddball of that initial trio. We talked about elevation and proportion and look over there on the top pair, and this one's definitely a bit more moderate for my speed. I'd like to tuck him up in his belly and pull a little of that extra bark off his tree, but he's wide, he's big-bodied, and probably has a better hip in his rear leg than is the two that we beat him with. I just need to see that thing a bit more elevated, a bit later, maturing. I like a lot of things about that young lady's bear, and she did an awesome job of getting them shown. Young man, again, does a really good job of getting one stuck. One that's a bit rawer in terms of his body shape, a bit shallower in terms of this one's forerib and center skeleton. If this one could blow up just a bit, the pieces are all in this gilt to make an incredibly high-quality pig. Very flexible, great hip and rear leg. A bit staler in the way that one's put together, not just from a condition standpoint, but I think it starts right there into her forerib. Not quite as much when you get on top of that gilt, but there's a ton of quality, and I love the running gear that that gilt has. That one certainly fits into the quality that we have in this top 3 or 4, a very good gilt. Young man's got a Chester pig that probably just ran out of pigs to compete against, but that thing is massive, massive muscled, and I think certainly fits within the realm of contention here that we have in the crossbreds. We need to fix that one's shoulder, neck attachment. Maybe pick that one up just a bit, the point of his shoulder, get that one going a bit differently to compete with the gilt that's directly in front of him as well. Young man comes out next with a bear that I think does, again, a great job of getting one presented. He proportions out well. That's a bear that I just don't think has enough in terms of muscle shape, and I certainly don't think he has enough when you get in behind him I just think he's a bit frailer in terms of his rear leg, a bit plainer in his muscle shape to a few that we have up ahead of him. A fast one that comes out next for sure. Young lady, that's why you're so skinny, because I wish if I had a pig like that, I'd weigh 175 pounds. I think a gilt that's really extended, very loose structured, obviously sound structured, a gilt that just needs more width, just needs a bit more muscle shape. My compliments to each one of those young people. Again, folks, show them we appreciate all the work they've done by giving them a big round of applause.
First place went to John King, Country Clovers. Second place went to Haley King, Loving FFA. Third place went to Kendall Cone, Loving 4-H. Fourth place went to Stetson Quintanilla, Loving 4-H. Fifth place went to Trevor Pope, Country Clovers. Sixth place, Gunnar Alexander, Loving 4-H. And seventh place went to Cody Nichols, Blue Jeans and Boots. Please bring your Class 3 crossbreeds to the wash rack. Class 3 crossbreeds to the wash rack.
A good class. And young lady, you need to get some more confidence in your fans back here. Oh my, she did it. You mean, yeah, she did it. Young lady's blue gilt suits me the best. I think, does she come with some faults? She does. And maybe that's what you guys were reserved about. Maybe we'd like to get that one's hip and his rear leg just going a bit different and everything would have been fine. I agree with those things. I think that's an opened up gilt that's tremendously good in the center part of her body. Huge back and huge pin. That's not the soundest pig that we'll see run through the ring, and she's probably not even the most attractive from blade forward, but I like her compositionally more than the young lady's black-headed hog that we have in second, who, no doubt about it, no doubt in my mind, is better bodied and certainly looser in how that one uses her hip or his hip and his rear leg. For me, you start to read that one through his throat and lower third of his body, in particular from his sheath back, when you start pulling a little of that off in terms of his condition. I think it throws off his proportion. I think it makes him look just a bit more mature, in particular ahead of his shoulder on his crest and the lower third of his body. It's a close top pair. My compliments to both those exhibitors. Let's give them a big round of applause if you would. The young lady who ends up in third's got a very basic gilt in my opinion, and I certainly don't mean that as a bad thing. She's big backed and she's big pinned, but it comes in a few different pieces. It's a gilt that I think would like to reorganize a bit and where her knee sits into her body. For a little extra frame that one's got, she's probably shallower in terms of her rib cage. Her rear leg doesn't function and use quite as good enough to give out on some of the extras that we find on the top pair. It's a good gilt that we have in third. My compliments to her as well. Now, young lady, I wish that we had a whole slew of Chesters and land races to look at, because that thing could walk in this big circle and I could look at him from the side all day and twice on Sunday. I think that thing is incredible in the way he's put together from the profile. The problem is, you come at him or go away, that's a pig that just runs out of gas. And these crossbreds, he's too frail in terms of his bone work. He gives up too much width and muscle, but that thing is incredible in the way he's put together from the profile. My hat's off to you for that one. I think that one could be really good. Young man's got one that definitely has more shape and crispness in the top side of his skeleton. It's a bear that I think does read a nickel planer in the way he's put together from the side. I'd like to pick him up on his front feet. I'd like to square him up from hock to ground, but I like a lot of things about that particular pig. Young lady comes out next with a black gilt that is absolutely rock star in terms of muscle. That's a gilt that, again, needs to be fixed in terms of feet. We need to get that one squared, need to blend that one better in terms of ham loin. Another gilt for me, for her frame size, probably has to shot too much muscle. It's a bit too bunchy, it's a bit too round. She comes off as a nickel too coarse for me. If you think that's not too bad and want to work her up into the top 2 or 3, I can't disagree with this. Some things about the gilt that are certainly deserving to be up and towards the top end of the class. For me, I need to see her blend together just a bit different, maybe tone her muscle shape down just a bit. Young lady's got one that, again, we look at that one from the side, deep-bodied, very soft. You've done a phenomenal job of getting that one presented and fed to the point where he's probably got just a shot more belly. And I think you do that because he probably doesn't have quite as much muscle shape as a few others. I think when that one comes at you, he's plainer about his base plate and form. You get him behind that particular pig. Of the group that we've seen walk through the ring thus far, he's plainer in terms of his pin, his hip, and his muscle shape just isn't there to counter that extra condition that he's got. Young man's got one that's wider. Young man's got one that's bigger hip. At the same point, that one's too low to the ground. We need to elevate that one in terms of growth curve and maturity pattern, and certainly need to fix that one in terms of feet and legs. I like the product that he's got. I just need to see it with a better set of running gear. Again, my compliments, folks. Give those kids a big round of applause and tell them we appreciate all the work.
First place went to Ashton Tarvin, Country Clover. Second place went to Kimber Cone, tag 9328 of Loving 4-H. Third place went to Trayson Johnson, Loving 4-H. Fourth place went to Kimber Cone, tag 2327. Fifth place went to Gunnar Alexander, Loving 4-H. Sixth place went to Trinley McCullough, Loving 4-H. Seventh place went to Ariana Carrasco, Loving 4-H. And eighth went to Jaden Tuff Malden, Cottonwood 4-H. please bring all your Class 4 crosses to the wash rack. Class 4 crosses to the wash rack.
The water got a lot deeper here in this particular group, and there's not a bad hog in the bunch. And we get up to these top 3, 4, 5, 6, and there's some really, really good pigs that have a tremendous amount of quality. But when this one hit the ring, I thought it was over. I love that thing and how it was presented from the side. Proportions are right. I think that one uses her hip and hind leg good enough. Could we blend that one better just a bit in her ham loin? Yeah, you could do that. Maybe even set her shoulder back onto her body a skosh. I'd agree with that. Is there another one in here that's stouter? Yes. Is there another one in here that has the same type of look or dynamics from the side? I don't think so. I think that's a really good gilt to win this particular group. Young lady's blue belted pig, I think, is incredibly good from the side. Again, one that I think proportions out very well. This thing probably has the shot more genuine muscle shape than hogs on either side of her. A gilt that I think got a little tighter in her hip and rear leg as the drive we're on. And she's a bit drier in terms of her full rib and muscle shape comparatively, and probably doesn't have just that out there presence up ahead of her shoulder. A very, very good bear that we have coming out next that I think is loose structured. Hip forward I think is really good in his proportions. He comes off a nickel planer ahead of his shoulder, but I think the plainness really becomes when you get on top of or behind this particular bear. In terms of his muscle shape, he gives up quite a bit, in particular right here in the seat of his pants. He also will kind of swing and pivot out of his hip and his rear leg. Tremendously good top 3. My compliments and congratulations to each one of those exhibitors. Young lady, phenomenal job of getting this bear presented and shown. I think that thing is really good from his ham loin forward. Hip, rear leg travel needs to be a bit different for me. He's too short and round in that particular area. And when you get on top of that bear, he's the flattest of the top 3 in terms of body shape. He's the driest back through his flank. One that's probably a bit better in the lower third of her body is this one that we have coming out next. A big pin one that probably just comes off as a nickel planer in the way that one's put together from the side. Definitely not as attractive ahead of her shoulder. A bit more moderate in terms of her frame size. I'd like to pick that one up just a bit in her front pasterns. One that's fundamental. She's big-bodied and I think has enough muscle. Doesn't have the X-Factor pieces from the side that I'm looking forward to win a show, but I think that thing has got a ton of good pieces and quality about her. Young lady, again, a good kind of pig that I just don't think has the extras from the profile. A bit rounder hip and wants to pull her rear leg up underneath her a bit more. She's big-pinned, she's big-bodied, she's fresh and presented to the nines. Not quite good enough in terms of her look and presence from the side. Young man's got one that I think probably has the shot more turn, an aggressive turn, the top side of his skeleton. It's a bear that's not without muscle by any stretch of the imagination. Again, one that comes off as a nickel planer in the way he's assembled from the profile, a bit rounder in his hip, a bit frailer in his makeup. A tremendously good class, especially that top 3, 4, 5. Folks, again, put your hands together for each one of those young people if you would.
First place went to Haley King, Loving FFA. Second place went to Maddie Cooksey, Loving FFA. Third place went to John King, Country Clovers. Fourth place, Swayze Fullmark, Cottonwood 4-H. Fifth place, Trey Tarvin, Country Clovers. Sixth place, Addison Tarvin, Country Clovers.
It's a good class, and honestly, I thought it was a fight for a second. The blue bear that wins, I think, is awfully impressive. A stout, good-looking one that for this weight still looks youthful. I look forward to seeing what he looks like compared to the rest of the class winners. Young lady, I think your gilt needs to use the restroom. I think that would relax her just a bit and maybe get out and go. That's a big-backed one that's very fresh-centered and big pin. She's still a bit rounder in her hip and wants to roach up there in her top line. I think she's just a bit more comfortable when she gets and goes compared to the young lady's bear. I love the back shape, and I love the fact that you can chase that pig around, that pig can chase you around that whip. I think it's incredible. I think one that's really expressive, another one that probably you start working down the lower part of that one's body, tighter in his forerib, drier through his flank, wants to step outside of himself, out of his rear step. Young man comes out next with one that's very, very fresh and full, the center part of his body. This pig wanted his own gear and didn't want to stop. He got a little short and quick in his rear step. He's a bit flatter in terms of his hip and not quite good enough in his rear leg movement to move up any higher. I love the Chester coming out. I'm telling you, I wish there was a Chester breed because the 2 or 3 that we've seen I thought were awfully, awfully good. Flexible, loose structured. Man, that thing comparatively gets out horse in particular up through his chest. His bone work isn't quite as stout. You get on top of him, he's a bit staler in his muscle shape comparatively. Awfully, awfully good Chester pig. Needs to work down just a bit in this crossbred division. Young man coming out next, nothing to hang your head about. I like a lot of things about your particular gilt. She's big back, she's fresh in the center part of her body. A gilt that I think becomes maybe a bit unproportional. She's so massive in terms of her body and her top shape, but she's a bit frailer in terms of her bone work. She's a bit rounder in her hip and wants to stab her rear leg to the surface. To me, she doesn't balance up quite as good. To me, she's not quite as good enough in terms of, and good enough comparatively, structurally, to the other group that we have ahead of her. Front 2/3 of this gilt are incredible. The back third is what ends up putting her in 7th. She is massive, she is stout, she is impressive, but she's also quite a bit coarser in the way she's put together. She needs to be better in her rear leg for me to work her up any higher. Excellent set of crossbreds. If I'm not mistaken, that's the last class that we're going to run through the ring, folks. Give those kids a huge round of applause if you would.
First place went to Dorian Cortese, Artesia FFA. Second place went to Lauren Henson, Artesia FFA. Third place went to Addison Fulmar, Artesia FFA, tag ID 9819. Fourth place went to Caden Golden, Artesia FFA. Fifth place went to Addison Fulmar, 9822. Sixth place went to Mason Golden, Cottonwood 4-H, and seventh went to Trinley McCullough, Loving 4-H.
Check. All right, excellent group of crossbred. And folks, I'm not going to sit here and beat a dead horse and break every one of them down again. I'm sure by now you're tired of listening to me, but man, I love pig shows and I love good pig shows, and you guys in Eddy County have an excellent pig show, so my hat's off to you guys for that. The lightweight's awfully good. The young lady's blue pig, I think, is awfully good. The calico's awfully good. The blue, in my opinion, is just better. The heavyweight's your champion. The spotted hip gilt the young lady brings, I think, relaxed a little bit and she's toned down. I think she proportions out a little bit better when her top line sets into her. It's a gilt that I think does have a tremendous amount of quality, but to be honest with you folks, I thought this was a two-headed horse. Young lady's calico is my second favorite. Congratulations.
Your champion cross went to Dorian Cortese out of Class 4, and your reserve went to Haley King out of Class 3. Reserve champion Hamp was Swayze Fulmar. Reserve champion York was Maddie Cooksey. Reserve champion Cross was Addison Fulmar. The reserve champion spot is Swayze Fulmar. The reserve champion cross was Haley King. And your reserve champion Duroc was Madeline Clark. Please bring all your champion pigs to the show ring, all your champion pigs to the show ring. Your champion spot was James King. Your champion Duroc was King as well. Your champion York went to Addison Tarvin. Your champion Hamp was Kaylee King. And your champion cross was Dorian Cortese.
Folks, I'm not going to take too much of your time, but again, you probably figured out that I like to talk a little bit, and I want to say a few things so you guys can just shut them down for a second. I've got 3 little girls and 3 kids. Wow, my son's going to be mad that I said that. I've got 3 kids at home, and every night we go to bed, we thank the good Lord for a few things. We thank for our family and our friends, and especially now we're kind of mourning the loss of my uncle. So we especially pray for them. We pray for the ability to live in this country and enjoy all the freedoms that come with that. And it seems as of late, and I don't have to tell anybody here, that some of those freedoms are under attack a bit. And I want to say that I am so unbelievably happy and proud to be in this industry with folks like this that care so much to put a show on when everybody says that you can't. So I want to say thank you guys to the bottom of my heart for doing what you're doing. Another thing that has become maybe a little bit heavy on my heart in the past, few years, is that it doesn't take too many channels to surf on the TV to figure out that there's a ton of evil in this world, and we do a terrible job as a society of thanking the people that run in when we're getting the heck out of it. So for any policeman, fireman, first responder, doctor, nurse, educator, anybody, thank you guys so much for doing exactly what you do. The last thing that I'll talk about is maybe the things that we have going on in this ring, and it's what we represent. It has nothing to do with the pig show. It's what the pig show represents. It teaches young people in society right now that need some of it, hard work, dedication, and that for God's sakes, not everybody can be a winner. And I hope to high heaven, if you're not out here right now in this ring, that you hate me and you're mad. I hope that's the case, but I can assure you, you got my fair shake, but you learn so much more from getting kicked in the dirt, getting back up, and working your tail off to get better than you ever will of holding up a championship banner. So I encourage you guys to keep doing what you're doing. I'm so proud of every one of these kids. And folks, if you agree with that, what they're doing on what is today? Tuesday? On a Tuesday night, that there is not a better thing on planet Earth they could be doing on a Tuesday night. Get out of your seats and give them the biggest round of applause you possibly can. You guys can fire these things back up, but again, my hat's off to you guys for putting on an incredible show. Everybody ringside, you make sure that you find these peoples on the committee, whether it be steer, sheep, goats, or this entire fair committee. You shake their hand, you socially distance shake their hand, I don't give a dang. Elbow, I don't know what you need to do, give them a text, I don't care, but you make sure that they know how much you appreciate their work, their dedication, because I can guarantee you it was not an easy task. The pigs have been phenomenal, the kids have been phenomenal, the crossbred's phenomenal. Congratulations. We bring out that reserve crossbred, and real quick, we'll highlight each one of these. The Yorkshire Gelt, I think, is just a really, really good kind of pig that probably doesn't have the extras. Probably hits you more of a breeding sow than a market show pig, but I think an awfully good one that wins the Yorkshires because she's just a bit more fundamental. The dark OPB is out there in terms of elevation and look. We'd like to maybe set her down just a bit in her blade, maybe relax her just a bit there, but she has some tremendously cool pieces, and if you don't think she's in the heat, you're out of your mind. The Duroc, I think, is awesome. We're just talking about how these things are proportional and unique in the way they're put together, but he still is fundamental in terms of build, width, and muscle. If you don't think he's in the heat, you're crazy. The Hampshire, I talked about that gilt, the lightest one I think that we had run through the ring, at least in the lightest class. Back 2/3 of that hog are awesome. I don't like that one's head, and I know that sounds pretentious and stupid, but I don't. But that behind there, I think, is an incredibly good pig. But folks, this reserve crossbred, I think, is unique. I think she's different. I think that's the second best one. Congratulations.
Your champion pig went to Dorian Cortese out of Class 4 of crosses, and your reserve went to Haley King out of Class 3 crosses. We'd like to give a big thank you to the donors for the buckles. Your champion was donated by Guy Chevrolet, and your reserve was donated by Cash and Collins Kaufman. Please give them a round of applause.